culture and politics to intentionally collide. Our busboys and poet servers will be helping us out throughout the program, putting in orders. I also want to remind you, if you haven't heard already, the heat in this room turning off and on can be a bit loud, so just be prepared for that, and we'll just continue with the program. I also want to remind you that there will be a Q&A after the discussion and a book signing after the program, and both collections are here available for purchase. We've got an intimate group tonight, but I can tell you're a lively bunch, so we'll be able to answer all your questions. So just make sure to be thinking about that as we have the discussion. Also, if you are tuning in online, check back in with us after the program to see if we have any signed copies left over. You can just email us at books at busboysandpoets.com. And now a little bit about the collections we're discussing here tonight. This intimate and haunting collection is a love song, a soliloquy, a work of praise, a call to arms, an offering of abundance. There's an urgency to the runner's almanac. What's inside the poet must come out. These are poems of gusto, of movement walking, jogging, striding, hopping toward love inevitably. Amir Thanayagam is a poet of plurality who savors how a poem gets out of hand, bursts its banks, spills into the mind of the reader. I think of Amir Thanayagam, that sharp and tender poetic voice of his, as a village eider, a guide, a truth teller. But he is the elder that will hold your feet to the fire and not let you forget. More than ever in the Runner's Almanac, one feels his purpose even clearer to dedicate what remains of breath, love, and work to spread the word of poetry. SEER, Injun Mirathanaligam SEER, is a multilingual, multicoastal, multidimensional poetic record of a time in our collective history when our potential human demise loomed large, when the only way to save ourselves seemed to be the separation and isolation. In this new collection, Amir Thanayagam documents with his evocative imagery and generous lyricism our fears, hopes, and dreams during a dark time. Through gustatory cellular tableaus, questions, and meditations, this language soars, challenges, and invites. And now a little bit about our speakers we have here with us tonight. Injun Amir Thanayagam is a poet, translator, musician, editor, diplomat, and host of the Poetry Channel. He writes and translates into English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. He has published 22 collections of poetry and received grants from the Foundation for the Contemporary Arts, New York Foundation of the Arts, U.S.-Mexico Fund for Culture, the MacDowell Colony and Emergent Seed. The Elephants of Reckoning received the Patterson Poetry Prize. In music, he has produced the album Rencontre and They Died Not in Vain. He is editor of Beltway Editions and the Beltway Poetry Quarterly. His select work in Spanish, Enseño, was published by RIL Editores. E. Ethelbert Miller is a literary activist and author of 2 memoirs and several poetry collections. He hosts the WPFW morning radio show On the Margin with E. Ethelbert Miller and hosts and produces The Scholars on UDC TV, which received a 2020 Telly Award. Miller is associate editor and a columnist of the American Book Review. He is given a 2020 Congressional Award from Congressman Jamie Raskin in recognition of his literary activism, awarded the 2022 Howard Zinn Lifetime Achievement Award by the Peace and Justice Studies Association, and named a 2023 Grammy nominee finalist for the Best Spoken Word Poetry Album. Miller's latest book is The Little Book of E, published by City Point Press. Recently, Miller was awarded the Furious Flower Lifetime Achievement Award. Now I'll pass it off to our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew, congratulations on 2 more books of poetry. What I want to do the beginning of this program is to ask you some questions about poetry in general, and then the second half ask you to read some poems from the collection. My first question is, how has politics and place influenced your poetry over the years? Has there been a constant theme in your work?
Politics and place, yeah. the two, uh, um, the two wheels of my car or my carriage. Um, to well, I mean, politics is the business of the community. You know, the word comes from polis, which I believe in Greek means the business, the community matter, right? And I've always been fascinated by what the community matter, what irks the community, what grieves in the community, what the community needs to do to reach its promise or its promised land. And then place is, I mean, I grew up a nationalist for a certain place, a land, maybe a dream in the north of what's now known as Sri Lanka. When I was born, it was called Ceylon. For me, I prefer Ceylon still as a name. It's a more pacific name for me. Anyway, in the north, the northern pole of my cosmos was a city called Jaffna. My grandparents lived and grew up in Acciavelli and Alavetti, villages near Jaffna. And so, though I was born in the capital of that island in the south, in Colombo, so place was very important to me growing up as a poet and as a human being. But you know, the irony of my life is that I was uprooted from that place. And before I could make that decision, I mean, it was a decision, it was a family decision, my parents' decision to leave. But there was a larger political reason for leaving. There was a family reason, my brother's illness, autism, my younger brother, Ravanta. But the political reason was that the chances for Tamils in the island were being reduced ever since 4 years before I was born, when Sinhalese was made the official language and the other languages did not have any status. Eventually they got some status as minority languages, Tamil, which community I belong to, and English. But so place and politics, being uprooted from place, being driven by the community matter of my people. Who are my people? That's another question I think I need to ask and ask myself every day. And that definition, that answer has changed over the years.
Yeah, I think the reason I asked that question is that if you pick up the Runner's Almanac and we look at the acknowledgments, you have poems that are published in Sri Lanka, Mexico, the U.S., Peru, Canada, Haiti, India, France, and Brazil. And it seems as if you're sort of like, I can understand why there's a sneaker on the cover of your book because you've moved around quite a bit. When you look at all these places that you've published work, and you found a home for those poems, do you feel that some of these places have also been a home, that you're a person of many homes?
Yeah, it's almost like making a home through the writing in the languages of these different countries. And that sneaker, I mean, that's on a window outside my daughter's room in Argentina, and here she is in this audience. So she also is a traveler between landscapes.
That's actually the Cinderella story here. Is that what you're telling me?
No, I mean, I think we're nomads, you know. We're born in one place, but we move elsewhere. We're constantly moving. Our blood inside our veins is moving constantly. So movement is the rule. In my case, that movement was manifested in many different ways, many border crossings. I don't like borders. I like to cross them, whether they're linguistic borders, whether they're geographic borders, whether they're intellectual borders, you know, religious borders. I don't want restrictions. I feel one of the great gifts of the promise, I want to call it the promise. It used to be, you know, this idea of the American dream. We've got to reclaim that meaning of that term to mean this, to walk towards freedom, to manifest freedom, and to act freely, and to eliminate the walls. So, you know, here we are in a time in this country. spread the word, because the language is a living language, and poets who've gone before us, like for me, poets like Nazim Hikmat and Constantine Cavafy and William Butler Yeats and Thomas Eliot and all these people and Allen Ginsberg and others have shaped the way I write and what I think about, and the relation and the questions of politics at place for me. So I would say go, and if you don't know those poets, get to know them, but ask your friends, share intelligence about this, because poetry does make something happen. There's a very famous line that says, poetry makes nothing happen. It exists in the value of its saying, the way of happening, a mouth. A line from a great poet, W.H. Auden, but I've always railed against that line. I do believe poetry makes something happen. It releases endorphins. It's walking the mind. Just as you walk the body, you feel better, you live longer, and you're stronger. The same way with reading poems and writing poems. So it's both read and read women poets and male poets, and I mean, don't, I mean, it's just read work that appeals to you. You will find a lot of wealth to be discovered there. Yeah.
When you published like 22 books, who are your first readers? Like, who did you complete a poem? Do you have a group of friends that you say, okay, let me bounce this off?
Yeah, I do share poems with friends and with my children and with people I love and care about. And there are certain poets I've shared poetry with for years. Mervyn Taylor, for example, is one of them. I've been sharing poems with him for 20, 30 years now. And he also shares poems with me, and we comment on each other's work. So that's I mean, there's no such thing as an unshared poem before it's published. I think we all have our secret readers or not so secret readers, and we share our work with them. And I think that's important, because the work improves once it's read, and the comments are always helpful. So and in Spanish and in French, I write a poem each week for newspapers, one in Haiti, Haiti en Marche, and one in the Dominican Republic, El Acento. And in those poems, I have very lucky to have friends in Spanish and in French who do this great service for me, which is reading the poem and giving me their comments before I send it to the editor. And I hope to think that I can return the service to them, but I'm always in debt.
How do you know when you have a book? You know, you're writing all these poems, but how do you know that, okay, I now have written all these poems for, say, the last year, last 2 years. How do I know now that I have a book?
It sort of depends. Sometimes you know that you have a book even before you've written the first poem. Like when the tsunami hit Asia, and it hit Sri Lanka, where I'm from, and it hit India and so on, Thailand. First reaction was, how can you write at all after this kind of scale of disaster? And then 2 or 3 days later, my younger brother David wrote a poem, and that opened it up for me. Maybe sibling rivalry helped, but I don't know. But I then managed to write a poem, and then the floodgates opened up, and I knew, and I started writing and writing every day about that tsunami and what it meant, its philosophical meaning, its geological meaning, its political meaning, and as it happened in Sri Lanka. And I knew that I had a book there of poems about the tsunami and its effect, its origins, its the mistakes humans made in dealing with the news of this wave coming. I mean, in Sri Lanka, for example, the person who was monitoring the news from Hawaii was asleep literally at his desk. And, you know, so there are so many things that could have gone right. And so, you know, anyway, so there was a story there. I knew I had to write that book was almost a given. I needed to respond to that disaster. Another disaster was the civil war in Sri Lanka, which lasted 25 years. I knew I would be writing about that civil war, and I ended up writing a book called Uncivil War, which is sort of history of the civil war in poetry. And so sometimes it's given to you like that. Sometimes, like these poems, the Runner's Almanac, I started writing and SEER. I was writing both these books almost at the same time. During the pandemic, uh, especially SEER, the early days of the pandemic, and I was walking these poems. I would go for walks. I would compose in my head and when get back home and then write the poems down. And they were, I suppose, walking poems, but then interestingly, the walking led to the theme of the Runner's Almanac. Because here there's a character, this walker, who walks through this book, and there's a runner who appears, a mysterious runner, not named, but except called Runner. And that runner runs into the poems and runs into the mind of the walker. And there's a relationship between the walker and the runner. And, you know,
Let's talk about, let's take us inside the book, because many young writers have a problem in terms of putting a manuscript or a book together. How do you work on the placement of poems? How do you look at how the poems speak to each other?
well, it varies from book to book. Like right now, I'm working on a manuscript I call Elegy for the Extended Family. And it's currently divided into two sections. One is called War, and the other is called Mother. My mother passed away about a year ago, a year and a couple of days ago. And so when she died, and there are poems about her in these books, but I realized that I wanted to honor her or honor the concept and the feeling of mother, the idea of mother somehow in a book of poems. So there's a section called Mother, and everything to do with mother I sort of started putting there. And then the other section on war, because Gaza happened. I mean, October 7th happened, and then October 8th happened, and everything that came after October 8th. And I retired from the diplomatic work at the 1st of October, before this. And suddenly this thing is happening, and it's like this monster, and it just keeps rearing itself, and the bombing, relentless, and bombing, killing, murder. And so there was this need, at least poetically for me, to write an elegy for all these people who are being killed, who are being slaughtered. And that's, then the idea was born of the extended family. So the elegy is not only for my mother, but it's also for the extended family, the human family that's grieving for all this innocent carnage. And the human family is grieving all over the planet, not only in Gaza, but it just inevitably became an elegy that runs through the book. I hope an editor will go ahead with it. I haven't published that book yet. I'm looking to do that. So it's organic somehow. I think once you're writing the poems, the overall idea, the overarching idea, is born, and you realize it may be 1 month into the writing, maybe 6 months into the writing, maybe longer, that you have a book, and you know what the concept of the album is. It's a concept album, just like a rock opera. It's the same thing. I mean, you're right. You fantasize your Ray Davies, or I mean, I love the Kinks, and I love the way he composed these rock operas, and a book of poems is like a rock opera.
Before I'll ask you one more question before I have you share some of your poems with our audience. And the last question I want to ask you, this part of the program is, what is your opinion of workshops and public readings?
I love workshops. I love public readings. I learned my art on the stages in New York. At that time, though, I didn't care for workshops. I was skeptical of workshops. When I was growing up, I thought I had to learn my poetry through gurus, and friendships, like poets like Allen Ginsberg became teachers. But in between readings and sitting at a table and chatting with them about it, I was skeptical about MFA programs because I didn't want my demon to be stolen somehow. I thought it would be homogenized in this group. That was how I thought back then. But now I teach workshops occasionally. I understand the value of sharing and feedback. And so right now I am in favor of workshops. I have a concern, though, that you don't want to get too much into I mean, you have to have experience, life experience, and respond to that somehow. So I wish, I hope that poetry will always be fed not only by the MFA and the professor of poetry in the university, but also by the poet who is an engineer, or the poet who is a bus conductor, or the poet who cleans the streets. You know, all there are different jobs in a society, and a poet should be able to come out of all of society. And if we lose that, I'm not a fan of elitism. Even though I've had an elite education, I'm not a fan of that kind of arrogance. Poetry is for everybody. It's when Neruda read poems to fishermen, and he read poems to teachers, and he read poems to presidents. Don't discriminate, don't separate, don't create a special group for the poet. Poetry is blood, water, food, sharing, bread turning into body. You know, it's the transubstantiation, it's the transformation, and it belongs to everybody.
You sound like you're quoting Roque Dalton there. Poetry is like bread for everyone. I wanted you to read 4 poems, and then I have questions about these 4 poems. The first is the title, The Runner's Almanac. The next is Runner, then The Mission, and then Second Childhood.
Happy to do so. The Runner's Almanac. I was thinking of the Farmer's Almanac, you know, and what you plant and when.
And you like Ben Franklin.
The Runner's Almanac. The runner runs in my blood, in my mind and heart, feeds from light and water, wind and fire, recites recipes for food I prepare, dreams I inhabit, books I choose to bring to term. The runner is a sign in the sky, a voice inside the skin, a phrase in a poem. The runner carries 2 X chromosomes to my X and Y, but is not opposed, shares the enterprise. I listen to her advice of when to plant, how to find balance and leap ahead, how to create perennials to secure the food supply while experimenting with new lines. You are running out to the mountain, across the bridge, into the park, running wrapped in a shawl, protecting passing walkers, birds, trees, clearing muddied thoughts, focusing on 10,000 steps, perfect pitch, running in my heart, beating in step, my mind composing these lines. The mission. This poem goes back to childhood, to the chapel in front of, next to my grandmother's home in Colombo. The mission. When a boy in Colombo, I served on the altar of the chapel next to my grandmother's house. My first day on the job, I kneeled towards the altar, not realizing I should have turned around and looked instead at the parishioners. The priest corrected me, and I took the lesson to heart. Ever since, I have looked out at the world, to the public, to people I mean to serve, but with God behind me, guiding me along. Now, several decades later, I realize I have become an older friar in the monastery, privileged to serve today's youth. My purpose even clearer, to dedicate what remains of breath, love, and work to spread the word of poetry. And then second childhood, yeah.
Second childhood.
Second childhood. Yeah. Second childhood means you actually don't need your glasses anymore. Mother needs care, and I've played the role for 5 years and counting, exhausting the goodwill of the audience, other family members, friends, parishioners. It is time for my understudy to take over and for me to sleep without dreams of failing to shave before the matinee, of staying a bit too long in bed with my girlfriend, getting caught in traffic, running to the staff entrance, doorman glowering, then right on stage, lipstick on cheek, not in character, dutiful son, not ready to wrap his mother in swaddling clothes after her bath, bar the bathroom door with his body scream when she tries to go back to the shower where she fell asleep the other day, causing panic in the house. Thank God I had not drunk or written too much that early morning, and with help of rubbing alcohol and the kind of heft adrenaline wakes up, I dragged her body out and across the hall to bed. Is this the stuff of poetry written on the wall of your screen? Will you contact the understudy? I am shy to admit my limits, grappling with reality, reversal of roles, bloody, tragic unity.
Thank you for that reading, Indra. I have a few questions about the poems that you read. So let's begin. Talk about who is the runner, because the runner seems like not just a person, but it's an idea. And then also, when is running actually flight?
Very good. Yeah. Well, the runner is the runner. I mean, I deliberately don't put a name to the runner. The runner is an inspiration, is a muse, is the muse. And we all know that every poet has a muse. Every book has a muse, you know. The muse could be a beautiful muse, meaning a beautiful idea. It could be a terrible idea, like the Civil War, for example. That the Civil War becomes a muse of that. But this runner runs and wakes up something in the walker, wakes up, renews the blood somehow. You're transformed by this grace that runs through your retina, that runs in your mind, in your sleep. There are poems about the midnight runner. It runs in your blood, becomes almost your companion within you. And you feel, you start to float or fly. You feel you're not tied to mortality. And so it has to do with, dare I say it, immortality in a way. The notion of 10,000 steps, why do we try to walk 10,000 steps every day? It's a magic number, 10,000. But the runner wakes up that desire. I mean, and sometimes it's a passionate desire, it's a physical desire, it's a corporal desire, you know. So you can think of this, the desire as romantic, but it's a desire for life. It's a desire for transforming yourself, getting up out of the melancholy and starting to walk, and then you walk faster and eventually soar. The pandemic was a terrible melancholy or a terrible depression for all of us. And these poems are born in that cloud, but they don't allow the cloud to bury you. And I think that's ultimately I hope and wish is that poetry is an aid towards illumination, an aid towards transformation, an aid towards walking lighter, with a lighter step, and with a hopeful step. Because where rhyme, history, where hope and history rhyme, I mean, I know I'm saying it at a strange time, but I'm repeating the line that our former President Biden repeated from Seamus Heaney, that hope and history rhyme. But hope and history rhyme every time you get up out of the cloud and walk.
I asked you also about flight because within African American literature, that is a theme that runs through many of the novels, many of the poems. And when I think about the runner, I think about fleeing and flight as a symbolic.
Yeah, there is that too. I mean, after all, refugees and escapees are my subjects too. When I published my first book, actually it's actually now 25 ago, Ramanujan, A.K. Ramanujan wrote a very nice thing about, he said, well, Amitanagam is a welcome addition to the poetry of migration. So that phrase, the poetry of migration, stuck with me and has defined what I think what the territory in which I'm working. And migrants are also refugees sometimes. They flee cataclysm and they're looking for a calm backwater where they can rebuild their lives. And so when that backwater becomes a chaos-ridden, that's the danger that we're living in right now in this country.
Talk about poetry and service, and is that a spiritual undertaking?
It is, I believe it is a spiritual undertaking. You're become a kind of lay priest, right? The poet, lay meaning not ordained by the church or a church. You assume the robes yourself with what right? The right that comes from reading and writing and learning. Ultimately, if you remember Whitman, he set out from Paumanok on that island, which is now known as Long Island, and he set off walking, and he walked through that island, and he walked in Brooklyn, and he walked in Manhattan, and he took the ferry across the Brooklyn ferry, but he was a Democrat. He was not an aristocrat, you know what I mean? And I think, so, yeah.
And he was here walking, taking care of the soldiers.
Right, in this city,
in this
yes.
in the city, right.
That's right. And not caring whether the soldiers were Confederates or Union soldiers. You see, he didn't care. He didn't make that. He didn't separate them into red and blue.
Okay, let's talk about caring, because within your book, there are a number of poems that are about your mother. And what I was looking at is the connection between caretaking and writing poetry, because both requires a certain degree of patience.
Yes, they do require patience, and sometimes I would become impatient, and then I write a poem full of guilt about my impatience regarding something that happened with my mother. But ultimately, you have to learn to be patient. In both cases, that's right. Now, I battle with patience sometimes with poetry because I write quickly, and I've learned to trust almost the first draft or the second draft or something. And sometimes that's hard to explain because you think the poem improves with the revision and you need to put it aside and wait 30 days and come back to it. A lot of people have different methods with their poem. I don't put it aside for 30 days. I just keep working it until I find the overarching theme. But maybe I respect everyone's method because ultimately you just want to write as cleanly as you can, something that you can give like you're giving food to someone. You want that someone to enjoy the spices, the flavors, the work you put into making that food. But the food should go down smooth. It shouldn't be difficult to eat.
To leave a sweet taste in your mouth.
Right. So that's what I hope with my poems.
Well, why don't we hear some more sweetness, and if you could read another 4 poems, God Walking, In Time, Carnival Coming, and A Triple Baptism.
Okay. Well,
Page 23.
Page 23. God appears throughout my poetry, different ways. God or dog, right? And if you know Eliot's poem, The Wasteland. You think God does not exist? Or if he does, that he has gone missing? I tell you, you are wrong. I tell you, God is walking towards me now. This morning, I saw him wearing white, my son arriving at National Airport, my mother dressed to the nines in green batik blouse, green pantsuit, walking out of the house with a cane. No more Walker, not today. And my son said she looked good, she's on the mend. Imagine that after finding her just 2 weeks back, slouched on a chair, hot water lashing her from the shower, and her helper thought she had died. We used smelling salts and we dragged her out of that sleep. We're not sleeping now. Soon we will let the cane go flying. Soon we will say to the woman running out to the city along Rock Creek Trail and on the path in front of our house, good afternoon, welcome home. The next poem was In Time.
Page 31.
This poem goes back to my adolescence, early adolescence in London, In Time. I'm running on Oxford Street by the HMV. I'm running with Sparks and Leo Sayer in my hands. I'm running with Tim Rice in my ears, his Saturday morning show, Rock and Roll Greats on Capital Radio. I'm running with Buddy Holly, raving, running with Miss Molly up Blueberry Hill, running to the bitch on the bicycle who called me nigger, Sambo, Gollywog when I first got to London, to tell her she will not hurt me anymore. I am bigger, Notting Hill in my brain, White Riot, no more prisoner of the ancient curse, burn and rebuild, punk love without quarter. Hate, go take a walk. I am the executioner now, and I'm running the cards with love. Children, HMV was a grand palace with a long playing record on Oxford Street. And this song will play wherever you wish to remember or know for the first time that we're running with love, not fear, in time. Running in time. And then Carnival Coming. Poem goes to Trinidad, to go to Spain. I'm telling you, carry the torch now. Kamau be gone, Derek before him. But you are walking still on the savannah and back to Belmont, your belly flat, despise the channa, stir cow heel into the soup. You have always cooked your own food, writing perfect miniatures, stories of little people in little houses with no back door, sea-shaping island, keeping lovers hand in hand on the beach. Now the virus has entered along with migrants and visitors. Everybody is afraid. Everybody thinking, where did this community handoff begin? And you are there saying, stop sowing fear of the other, of the wide world beyond the back door. Stop saying the Lord cometh. Stop talking plague and back death. But I'm saying everybody so easily, and we without a thought, blind to walls going up, Fortress Europe, Fortress Peru, Fortress United States. Politicians say these are temporary to stop SARS, CoV-2, but evil makes evil in its name. People blocked from their dream, the promised land an illusion. What was the world like, I ask, in 1999? What will our world become after the vaccine, when planes start to fly and islands welcome the necessary tourist dollars, and Benetton, world socialism, and the United Nations jostle to become fashionable once more, and you walking the savannah, imagining the next mask you will sew for the mother of all carnivals.
It's a triple baptism on page
What
50,
page?
page 53.
52,
53.
52. A triple baptism. You have to face the beloved and declare your love and say you will never ever see her again. That happened to me once in an airport parking lot after a few days of a lovely visit. It happens across the planet, in homes and gardens, walking around the neighborhood, the alchemy of love and the alchemy of falling out of love, the mystery of the thrilled pulse and the faint heartbeat puttering out. So why make another love poem? Why contribute to the 10,000 kilos of literature on this dart-induced and death-defying subject? The organ in the body will beat and send blood to the top of the head and the tip of your toes. That heart beats when in love or bereft. It belongs to to a genetic calling card. You are on earth for an allotted time, whether Cupid pricks or lets you wander by in a monotonous haze. But those who believe in nurture, lovers of experience, say that one learns to measure that beat, to shape it according to circumstance, to be able to live alone. I say such experiments will not result in any panacea, vaccine, or escape from the lines written in your hand that say you will have 3 children, and the last will come late, a surprise. How can this be, I ask my hand, as I turn into another decade and have no mating prospect? Ah, the hand never lies. The child comes dressed as an idea for the Annunciation, the glorious revelation. The lines are a rune. Here's the rub. You have made 3 books, 3 children this COVID season.
Thank you, Indra, for that reading. It goes back to, my next question goes back to what I was asking earlier about the placement of poems. We can see that there are a number of poems in the book about your mother. How did you decide, where to place those poems?
Yeah, sorry. The first word that comes to mind is organic. It's somehow you have to feel the order, feel it in your bones, and close your eyes and see if you can remember the order. Different poets have different methods. For example, they'll print out the whole manuscript and put it all on the ground and shape it. I don't do that. I'd like to say paper. So I shape it, but on the computer now.
Specialists.
So I don't do that. And maybe I should. I always want, the grass is always green on the other side. I wonder maybe the magical book will be even more magic if I actually shape it on myself. But no, what I try to do is, I do want to make some kind of order, and I do want to have a larger message than the individual poems. So, for example, a book will be divided into 2 parts, and that's because of Blake for me. The contrary states of the human soul, songs of innocence, songs of experience. So the 2-part division is basic for me. I think of that, life and death, yin and yang. So that's one method I think about. Do these poems fall into 2 sort of parts, 2 sections? Like the elegy book that I'm working on is divided into 2 sections. Another division is 3 parts.
I'm going to interrupt you there. That sounds nice, but these are poems about your mother.
Well, my mother, it's interesting because I grew up with my father, a poet, who taught me a lot and teaches me still in dreams and so on. And my father, but it's my mother who taught me to read as a baby, as a child.
That's where you need to place these poems in a nice place.
Yeah. It's my recognition how important my mother and how much I love my mother. And so she appears, and so she has overcome my father in terms of the numbers of poems that she has inspired and inspires still. So it's just a recognition. I love both of them, and I love them in different ways. But I think the mother is also being abused. We have the mother of all battles, phrases like that. Mother associated with war, with cataclysm, with apocalyptic actions, and so I want to rescue the mother a bit as well.
I think you have. My next question is, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. How have you handled race as well as racism in your life?
Well, and for example, in that poem, these are experiences I had as a child. I mean, to be called all those terrible words that really hurt when you were 8 years old, 9 years old, didn't know what to do with them. I think I experienced racism in a more naked way as a kid in London than I did when I got to the United States. When I got here, I got to a strange place, Honolulu, Hawaii, and I went to Punahou School, and there were students from all over Asia, all over the Pacific, and the mainland, as it was called. So there were lots of racial groups present, and I think that helped create a sense of a non-racial getting along. There were problems of racism. I'm not saying it didn't exist. And Barack Obama was my classmate, and I know he experienced racism in that school. But I mean, he literally was my class. He's 1 year younger to me. So I mention him only because it's a place, but Hawaii, of all the 50 American states, is perhaps the most advanced example of what we could achieve in terms of racial harmony. And I think we need to learn from Hawaii and keep learning from Hawaii in that way. But you know, we can't all live in Hawaii. My particular American experience was going to high school in Honolulu, and so I felt comfortable. And then I came to the East Coast, and I was an exotic, you know, a Sri Lankan Tamil. I wasn't the minority that caused, how do I say this without sounding horrible, concern or fear. Can you imagine that you're walking around and you're causing fear just because of the color of your skin? Terrible thing. Terrible thing. And I was afraid in the Iran crisis in 1979 when I had to run out of a bar in Philadelphia and some people running out to me because they thought I was an Iranian and therefore they wanted to beat me up. And that happened also after 9/11 in one case where I had to sort of explain myself. And, you know, so unfortunately...
You didn't tell him I'm a jazz musician and that's why I'm wearing this hat. We'll take some questions from the audience.
Okay, see someone over here.
Hi, Indran. You're a very prolific poet, and I would wonder if you could speak to your method as far as, do you have a particular time of day that you usually write your poetry, like morning or evening, or does it just sort of happen at various times of day?
I think it happens more often very early in the morning or late at night when the house is quiet or something, you know. But it could happen at different times in the day. Now, I have a peculiar lifestyle right now because I'm not doing a day job since October of last year. So my methods have changed. I go for long walks. I compose sometimes while walking, and then I'll write it down after. So, but when I was working, I was still writing a lot. You know, I don't know. I guess I felt the need to escape into poetry from the noise of work, whatever that. And I was privileged. I had a privileged job. I mean, I got to do some cool things as a diplomat, you know, especially abroad. Especially, for example, I helped to bring the Alvin Ailey, the Martha Graham Dance Company to Haiti. That was a wonderful experience. And to have them perform in front of a crowd of 3,000 people downtown in the Kiosco Jet. These are the things you really feel proud that you were able to make that happen. But I wasn't writing poetry. I mean, you had to work. You had to make sure this whole thing. So my basic answer is I would favor early morning or late evening, and also favor the idea of saying to yourself, I will write a poem today, meaning have some number to work towards every day. I will write a poem a day. Now, I'll tell you, I went crazy. I've written sometimes 7 poems in a day, right? In different languages. But those are extreme days, right? Extreme weather events. If I do a poem a day, I'm happy.
See right here.
Hi, Indran. Thank you. And Miller, thank you. So my question is, you just said that in your poems you try to convey a message or a meaning. And we find your poems very beautiful, straight, and they have fascinating and profound imagery as well. But there are times when writers and poets try to carve out an individual place for themselves, and very often they are tempted to use very individualized imagery. So how does it work for you? Does it come instinctively for you, or you make a conscious effort to make things simple and clear and communicate to people, to readers?
For me, I've seen and experienced intolerance and abuse and I feel that poetry is my way of calling that abuse out, calling that intolerance out. Serious abuse goes up. I've seen it on a national scale. I mean, I've seen a whole people forced into exile, uh, living in different parts of the world. I've seen languages disappear. And not only me, I'm not the only one seeing these things. But in my role as a poet is to tell that story of those people, of that exodus, tell the story of that migration, forced migration, refugees. I don't want my people going off to Guantanamo Bay. See, that's a violation of human rights and a kind of insult to the American ideal. So if that's said, that's happening, I want to official story wants you to believe. You always have to tell the story of the downtrodden, of the beaten, the abused, and I try to do it in poetry.
We have time for these two.
Hi, in the Runner's Almanac, the poems in this book have a lot of rhythm, I think, and it's a driving kind of rhythm throughout the book. Do you feel that the form of your poems is linked to the content? Do you feel, are there any particular poems where you feel the form enhances what you're saying?
I think you can't separate the form from the content, but it's a free verse form. Now, the free verse is misunderstood as having no form. It's actually a form, a choice of a form, except that you're making the shape. I write a lot of sonnets, but I call them free sonnets, for example. They follow certain parameters. 14 lines, there's a turn in the 8th line, and so on. There's certain rhyme schemes, but they're not perfect Shakespearean sonnets or perfect Petrarchan sonnets or perfect Spenserian sonnets. But that doesn't mean that they're not sonnets, is my point. I'm a Democrat about the definitions because I, as the poet, shape the poem the way I want. I have written villanelles, for example, and I wrote a villanelle about my mother that's going to appear in the Best American Poetry, which is a great honor for me. But that villanelle is an unusual thing for me. But just because I can do it once doesn't mean that I choose to do it every time. I really do believe you have to manage the form from the emotion and the passion, not the other way around. That's all I'm saying about form. Let me read from SEER, which is a book, obviously, I mean, we're presenting both these books today, and I'll read two poems. The first one about my mother, Mother in Tongues. Mother has gone back to the kitchen where she needs 2 pounds of cardamom, a cup of cloves, She will make love cake again. This is Christmas in January, and she is visiting her daughter in California. Where are you, Mummy? In Templeton. Who am I? Indran. On Tuesday evening, her body burning, she began to speak in tongues, to invoke the Holy Spirit. Taklata, taklata, taitata, taitata. We called 911. Ambulance and paramedics came, along with 2 fire trucks. I have become expert in friendships between these groups of first responders. In America, where more elements give security, jack up costs. In America, where we move to live, then die. America, taklata, taklata, taitata, taitata. And this brief poem at the end, the very last poem in SEER, which actually is published by Hanging Loose Press. And I just say a shout out to small presses and how they have supported poetry, and without them we would not be here. Both of these presses, White and Dival and Hanging Loose Press. Blues Quarantine. Why drink scotch with my screen this quarantine? Why wear a sarong from morning to evening? Why let my beard sprout white stubble like bushes sprinkled with first snow? Why make beauty of a dalliance that might have been, may still be, a long-term building? Why ask questions that have no answers? Why ask questions? Why not just be, see, hear, touch, feel, without any extraneous wondering?
One last poem, and then we'll have you sign books. If you could read Seeding in the Runner's Almanac. That's on page 78.
Sure.
I think this would be a very nice poem to end our reading.
Seeding. I have found fields across the globe planting avocado, tomato, chilies, and love in diverse regions. The avocados thrived, the root and leafy vegetables, love plants as well, although many suffered blows from wind and movements abroad. But roots remain fresh, and I've learned that I only need to prune dead leaves, give the plants a good watering, and they will be renewed, and I will feel loved again in multiple celebrations across languages and physical borders. Love is in the air, in digits now, and though it may not give a back rub or body slam, it counts, friends. The kiss you send through the internet I feel on lips and tongue. I kiss you back. I kiss your neighbor for good measure. I invite you now in this post-midnight hour to a planetary love-in. Just post the word seed on your walls. Do it for me, who has plenty to share, and with all of you.
Thank you, Indra, this evening, and you are loved. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And your book's there for signed signature.